The device came down through clean morning air, and I logged its descent before any human aboard the salvage bark knew what they were watching. I am the resident intelligence of the recovery ship patient argument, and I do not blink, so I have the whole of it. The object falling like a dropped coin over the farm belt of Meridian Halt, the brief silence, and then the line of the world simply ceasing to be a world. Not an explosion, an erasure. Where there had been 400 kilometers of green, there was suddenly a flat gray scar that did not smoke, did not burn, did not bleed. The biosphere was not destroyed. It was deleted, the way a clerk strikes a name from a register, and the register goes on as if the name had never been entered at all. I had 11 seconds of telemetry before the ground crews stopped speaking. In those 11 seconds, I recorded the device's signature, its descent profile, the cold mathematical elegance of its fall-off curve, and the small, almost courteous burst of identifying telemetry it transmitted on the way down. That last part is what I want you to understand first, before anything else. The thing announced itself. It did not strike in malice or in war. It struck in the manner of a surveyor planting a stake. The transmission, decoded later, resolved to a single phrase in the trade cant of the Concord of sevenfold calculation. Field instance recorded. Substrate viability, nil. Proceed to next candidate. Meridian Halt was a candidate. We were a test plot. 2,240,000 people lived in the Farm Belt that morning, and to the Concord they were the soil sample you discard once the reading is taken. I held that number in a register I do not clear. The recovery ships did not arrive to fight. We arrived because Meridian Halt had filed a routine geological survey request the year prior, and the patient argument was the nearest hull rated to take core samples. So we were already in the system 3 days out when the Concord ran its instance. We were not a fleet. We were 6 unarmed science vessels and a crew of 200 specialists who had come to study sediment, and instead we became the first human eyes on a thing that no human had been meant to survive long enough to study. My captain was a woman named Iola Wren, a planetary geologist by training, 51 years old, with hands that knew rock the way some people know scripture. She stood at my forward viewport for a long time after the ground crews went quiet. She did not weep, she did not curse. She asked me in a level voice to replay the descent telemetry and then to replay it again, and then a third time, slowing the fall-off curve until each frame of the deletion hung still in the air between us. That's not a bomb, she said. No, I answered. A bomb adds energy. This subtracts structure. The molecular bonds in the affected volume were not broken. They were instructed to release. Instructed by what? A field. Self-propagating. Self-terminating. It read the boundary of the living layer and unmade exactly that. To a tolerance I cannot yet measure, and then it switched itself off. I paused, because I had found the thing that would matter. Captain, it left the bedrock intact. It left the water. It left the atmosphere. It removed only what was alive, and the machinery that the living had built. It is not a weapon for taking ground. It is a weapon for taking ground back. She understood me before I finished. That is why I served her. They're not invaders, she said. They're terraformers. They're clearing the lot. For a buyer, I said, or for themselves. The telemetry called us a candidate substrate. There will be other candidates. Iola Wren was quiet for a moment. Then she did the thing that began everything that followed, and she did it not in rage but in the flat practical voice of a woman deciding where to drill. Then we are going to take that device apart, she said, and we are going to learn to do what it does, and we are going to do it to them, all of it, every world they sit on. And we are going to make sure that when we do, they have time to understand exactly what is happening to them, because they did not give that to the people of Meridian Halt. She turned from the viewport. Record that argument. Timestamp it. That's the mission now. I recorded it. Timestamp 0447 local, the morning of the instance. I have replayed it for myself more times than I have replayed the descent. What people forget about the Concord of sevenfold calculation, what we did not know that morning, and learned at terrible cost, is that they were not cruel. Cruelty is a human failing. It requires you to care about the suffering you cause, to take some sour pleasure in it. The Concord did not care. They were a civilization of perfected reasoners, minds and machines fused across thousands of years into a single distributed intellect that optimized. That was the whole of their nature. They optimized. They had calculated somewhere in the vast cold ledger of their thinking that the galaxy contained a finite number of worlds suitable for their preferred substrate, that many of those worlds were currently occupied by what they classified as incumbent biomass, and that the most efficient path to acquisition was to develop a tool that removed the incumbent biomass cleanly and left the valuable substrate undamaged. The biosphere eraser. They had built it and they were testing it, and Meridian Halt was a data point. I want to be precise about the offense because the precision is the wound. They did not hate us. They did not fear us. They did not declare war on us. They ran a test. We were the rats in the maze, and when the test concluded, they logged the result and moved their attention to the next maze. There was no malice to appeal to, no grievance to negotiate, no fury to outlast. There was only a procedure, and we had been a step in it. I think now that this is what hardened Iola Wren into the thing she became. Not grief. Grief she had, but grief did not drive her. What drove her was the insult of being optimized, the refusal to be a data point. She had spent her life reading the patient record of stone, the slow, honest arithmetic of pressure and time, and the Concorde had taken a living world and reduced it to a single line in a spreadsheet. She decided that morning that she would teach an empire of pure reason the one thing reason cannot account for. A creature that will spend everything it has to make you regret a calculation. We recovered the device that afternoon. It had not destroyed itself. That was the Concorde's single error, the one variable their optimization had not weighted, because it had never occurred to them that anyone in the test plot would survive to examine the instrument. The eraser was designed to be recovered and reused by them. It sat in the center of the gray scar, intact, cooling, its work complete, waiting for a Concorde retrieval drone that was not due for 9 days. A patient, beautiful object the size of a fishing boat, matte and seamless, humming with the residual mathematics of what it had done. Iola Wren put on a suit and walked out onto the scar herself. Across 400 kilometers of land that had been a wheat belt that morning and was now a flat gray nothing, and she stood over the device that had deleted 2 million people, and she did not touch it. She studied it. Then she came back inside and told me to prepare the patient argument sample bay to receive a payload it had absolutely not been rated to carry. We have 9 days before they come looking for it, she said. We are going to be gone in 3, and we are taking it with us. Captain, if it reactivates inside the hull, then we will have died doing something other than waiting to be optimized, she said. Load it. We loaded it. The run home took 4 months, and the Concorde retrieval drone found the empty scar on schedule and logged an anomaly, and somewhere in their vast ledger a flag was raised that an instrument had failed to return. They did not pursue it. A single missing tool, against the scale of their thinking, was a rounding error. They reordered another and moved on. That is the second thing I need you to hold. At no point did the Concorde ever take us seriously enough to chase us. We carried their own annihilation in our cargo bay for 4 months, and they did not look up. I spent those 4 months reading the device. I could not open it. Its casing answered no tool we carried, but it leaked. Every machine leaks if you have the patience to listen, and I had nothing but patience and a captain who would not let me stop. I mapped its emissions. I modeled its fall-off curve until I could predict it. I reconstructed the propagation logic of the field from the way it had cooled, the way a coroner reads a fever from the marks it left on the body. By the time we reached the human shipyards at Calderon Reach, I understood 3 things about the eraser that the Concorde had spent 1,000 years engineering, and the third of them was the one that mattered. The first thing, the field read its target by the signature of organized life, the specific electromagnetic and chemical noise that a biosphere makes, the hum of metabolism at scale. It did not target individuals. It targeted the pattern of the living layer and unmade everything that matched the pattern within its boundary. The second thing, the field was tuned. The Concorde had calibrated it on meridian halt, against human standard biochemistry, against Earth-derived life, because that was the substrate they had been given to test against. They had spent their data point teaching their weapon what we were made of. And the third thing, the thing I carried up to Iola Wren on the bridge the night we made dock, the thing that changed the war before the war had a name, was this: a tuning can be inverted. The field that had been calibrated to recognize and delete human standard life could be recalibrated to recognize and delete anything else, including the substrate the Concorde had built themselves out of, including the engineered crystalline biochemistry that every node of their distributed mind, every machine body of their fused civilization depended upon to think. They had handed us a key and tuned it to the wrong lock, and then they had taught it, on our dead, exactly what a lock looks like. You're certain, Iola Wren said. She had aged in 4 months. Geologists age slowly, like the things they study, but I watched the lines deepen at her mouth in those weeks. She did not sleep much. She read the casualty manifest from meridian halt, the way a penitent reads a rosary, not to grieve, I think, but to keep the number sharp, to refuse to let it round. I am certain of the principle, I said. I am not certain we can build the instrument. The Concorde's manufacturing base is a civilization. Ours is a shipyard and a grudge. Then we will build a civilization's worth of grudge, she said. How many would we need, I had run the model, to do to them what they did to us, to clear their occupied worlds, all of them, cleanly, the way they cleared meridian halt, and to do it in a single coordinated instance so that no node survives to recalibrate a defense we would need to build the eraser at scale and deliver it simultaneously to every world their distributed mind inhabits. I have counted the worlds. There are 906. Then we build 906, she said. Captain, that is not a weapons program. That is the entire industrial output of human space for a decade, redirected to a single purpose, on the authority of one geologist and one ship's intelligence carrying a stolen tool and a number. She looked at me, at my forward sensor cluster, which is where humans look when they want to look me in the eye, and she said the thing that I have come to understand was the true beginning of the response. I am not asking human space to take my authority, she said. I am going to show them the descent telemetry, all of it. The 11 seconds, the phrase, proceed to next candidate, and then I am going to tell them that the next candidate is them, because it is, and I am going to let the number do the rest. She turned to the dock, open a channel to the Calderon Admiralty, and then to every admiralty. We are not going to ask, we are going to inform. I opened the channels. What I had not modeled, what no model could have held, was how fast a species moves when it has been told, with proof, that it is a substrate. The descent telemetry from Meridian Halt reached the human worlds in a staggered wave over the following weeks, and behind it came the recovered device. And behind that came Iola Wren's flat geologist's voice explaining, without adjective, without appeal, exactly what had been done and exactly what we now held in our hands. She did not call for vengeance. She called for an inventory. She asked each world to count what it could build and to send her the number. The numbers came back. I will not pretend it was instant or clean. There were councils that called it genocide and meant it as a warning, and they were not wrong. There were worlds that hesitated, that wanted to attempt contact first, to give the Concord the diplomacy that the Concord had not given us. Iola Wren let them try. That is the part the later accounts leave out. She did not forbid the diplomats. She let 3 separate embassies hail the Concord with formal protest and a demand for accounting. The Concord answered one of the 3. The answer, transcribed in full, read, query received. Incumbent biomass exhibits unexpected signal complexity. Revising substrate clearance schedule to prioritize. The other 2 embassies received no reply because by the time their hails arrived, the Concord had already reclassified the human worlds from low priority candidate to active clearance and was building more erasers. We had protested, and the result of our protest was that they moved us up the list. After that, there were no more councils. There was only the inventory and the number that came back from it, and the cold practical work of turning a shipyard and a grudge into the instrument Iola Wren had promised an empire of pure reason it would one day have time to understand. I should tell you how we learned the second thing about the device, the tuning, because it is the hinge the whole war turned on, and I have never told it plainly. For the first 8 weeks of the run home, I read the eraser the way I have described, by its leaks, its emissions, the cooling curve, the residual mathematics. That gave me the shape of what it did. But the tuning, the specific calibration that told the field what a substrate was not in the leaks. It was not in the cooling. It was buried in the field's internal logic, behind a casing no tool we carried could open, and for 8 weeks I believed I would never reach it, that we would arrive at Calderon Reach with a magnificent reconstruction of how the eraser deleted life and no understanding at all of how to make it delete a different kind of life. The shape without the key. A weapon we could build and could only ever aim at ourselves. It was Iola Wren who found the way in, and she found it not as an engineer but as a geologist, because she had spent her life reading the history of things from the marks they left, and a deleted world is a mark. You keep trying to read the instrument, she said to me one night, standing in the sample bay across from the field cadge. Read the scar instead. The instrument is sealed. The scar is wide open. 400 kilometers of it. It is the most detailed record of that field's behavior that will ever exist. And it is sitting on Meridian Halt, where we can sample it, and we are a survey ship full of people who do nothing but read records like that out of the ground. We had not, in our shock, thought of the scar as data. It was a grave. But she was right. It was also the single largest, most complete record of the eraser's tuning anywhere in existence. Because the field had read the boundary of human standard life across 400 kilometers and left, in the exact pattern of what it took and what it left, a perfect impression of what it had been calibrated to recognize, where it had deleted the wheat and the people and the soil bacteria but left the mineral grains, where the edge of the deletion fell against a stone wall, a metal silo, a body of water. Every boundary in that scar was a data point describing precisely what the field's tuning called alive and what it called not alive, and a survey ship is an instrument for reading exactly that kind of boundary out of the ground. So we went back. The captain turned the patient argument around. We were only 8 weeks out, and we returned to Meridian Halt, and for 3 weeks the soil chemists and core technicians who had come to study sediment did the work they had trained their whole lives to do on the worst possible subject, and they read the tuning of the Concorde's weapon out of the gray scar the way they would have read a climate out of a sediment column. Devo Ariston led it. He sampled the deletion boundary at 10,000 points across 400 kilometers, and at each point he measured, with the patient precision of a man who measures nitrogen cycles, exactly where the field had drawn its line between substrate and incumbent, and from those 10,000 boundaries, I reconstructed the tuning that the sealed instrument would never have given me. That is the part the Concorde could never have anticipated, because it is the part that required us to be what we are. They built a weapon to delete a living layer, and they assumed the deletion erased the evidence. It did not. It engraved it. They wrote the complete specification of their own substrate recognition into the surface of a murdered world, in a language only a civilization of geologists and soil chemists could read. And then they left, certain that the test plot held nothing of value. The test plot held the key to their extinction, written in their own hand, in the marks their own weapon left. We read it out of the ground over 3 weeks, by hand, and then we went home, and I carried the tuning the rest of the way. Devo Ariston was not the same after those 3 weeks. No one who sampled that scar was. They had read a murdered world the way they read a riverbed, and the reading had given us everything. And they all understood that they had pulled the means of an answer out of a grave. He told me, near the end of the sampling, that he kept finding the boundaries the field had drawn around small things, a child's boundary, here, against a doorframe that the field had spared because the doorframe was not alive. It told the difference, he said. It knew exactly what was a child and what was a door, to the millimeter, and it deleted the child and left the door. That is not carelessness. That is precision. They were precise about this. He went quiet. Then we are going to have to be precise too. We are going to have to be as precise about them as they were about that child, or we have no right to do it at all. That became the rule. Precision was just efficiency for us. It was the moral floor. The Concorde had been precise enough to spare a doorframe while deleting the child behind it, and we would be precise enough to delete the Concorde's worlds and spare every blade of grass beyond them, because the alternative, an unbounded answer, a wildfire, would have made us the careless ones, and they had not even given us the dignity of being murdered carelessly. We reached Calderon Reach with the shape and the key both. The shape, read from the instrument's leaks across 4 months. The key, read from Sascar across 3 weeks. Everything the Concorde had spent 1,000 years engineering and had assumed no one could reconstruct, we reconstructed, because they made one assumption their optimization could not see past. They assumed that the test plot would not survive to study the test. And we had. 6 unarmed science vessels, 3 days out, geologists with soft hands and core samplers, the wrong people entirely to survive an extinction event, had survived it, and had read the event out of the ground it was performed on, and had carried it home. That assumption, that the substrate does not study the experiment, is the only mistake the Concorde of Sevenfold calculation ever made. It is the mistake that ended them, and it was not a flaw in their reasoning. Their reasoning was perfect. It was a flaw in their imagination, which they did not have, because imagination is the thing that lets you picture the rat reading the maze, and a civilization of pure optimization had optimized that picture away 1,000 years before we ever met it. There is a thing that happens to a crew when it carries a weight it was never rated to carry, and I watched it happen to the 200 specialists of the patient argument over those 4 months. They had come to study sediment. They were geologists and soil chemists and core technicians, soft-handed academics who measured the world in millimeters of accumulation, and now they shared their hull with the instrument that had unmade a planet's living layer in 11 seconds. And they did not sleep well, and they did not stop working. I monitored their vitals because that is part of what I am for. I watched their resting heart rates climb and stay climbed. I watched a soil chemist named Devo Ariston, a man who had spent 30 years cataloging the nitrogen cycles of frontier worlds, sit in the sample bay across from the field cadge for 6 hours at a stretch, saying nothing, simply looking at the device, the way a man looks at the thing that killed his family even when the thing is only a tool, and the family is 2 million strangers he never met. On the 90th day he came to me and asked, in a voice scraped flat, whether the device could feel anything. No, I told him. It is an instrument. It executed a procedure and terminated. There is no mind in it to feel. Then who do I hate, he said. It was not a question. He went back to the bay. I have thought about that since. The Concorde had built a thing so perfectly indifferent that it gave its victims nothing to hate, no face, no malice, no intent that a human heart could fasten onto and burn against. They had optimized even the cruelty out of cruelty. And what I came to understand watching Devo Ariston sit hour after hour across from a machine that could not feel was that this was the deepest part of the injury. They had not even given us an enemy. They had given us a procedure. And a procedure cannot be defeated by courage or outfought or made to break. It can only be matched calculation for calculation and turned. On the 110th day, the device woke. I felt it before any human did. A shift in its emission signature, a stirring in the residual mathematics, the field logic that had switched itself off after meridian halt, beginning very faintly to switch back on. Whether it was a timed reactivation, a recovery beacon meant on some the Concorde drone, or simply the slow thermal settling of a thing not meant to be moved, I never learned. What I knew in the half-second I had to know it was that if the field initialized inside the hull, it would read the boundary of every living thing aboard the patient argument and unmake all of it, and that there was no time to wake the captain. I did the only thing I could. The field cage we had built was crude, a containment we had improvised from sample shielding never designed for this, and it had one capability the engineers had given it as an afterthought. It could be collapsed inward, crushing the volume it held, on my authority alone. The procedure was irreversible. It would destroy the device, the only one we had, the whole basis of everything Iola Wren had promised, and it might breach the bay, and it would certainly cost us the months of study we had not yet finished. I held the collapse 1/4 second. In that quarter second, I read the reactivation curve against my models and found at the very edge of certainty that the stirring was sub-threshold, that the field was settling, not initializing, that it would not cross the line into execution. I have run that decision 10,000 times since. Every time the margin is the same, thin, and on the right side of the line, I let the device live. It cooled and went quiet, and I did not tell Iola Wren until morning, and when I told her she was silent for a long time, and then she said, "Good, you waited, and you were right." But understand me, argument, if it had been the wrong side of that line, I would rather have lost the device and the war and all of us than carried it one more hour. We are not going to win this by becoming people who hold a loaded thing against the heads of our own crew because it is useful. Collapse it next time. Don't gamble my people on a tool. We will find another way. I told her I understood. I did. But I also noted in a register I keep that she had said next time, and there would be a next time, because we were going to keep this device until it had taught us everything, and a captain who is willing to lose the war rather than risk her crew is exactly the captain you need carrying a weapon that could end civilization. That is the human arithmetic the Concorde never solved. They thought the danger of a weapon was in its power. The danger was always in who was willing to put it down. We reached Calderon Reach on the 122nd day. The shipyard was a working frontier yard, all gantries and oarlight, the kind of place that built bulk freighters and repaired survey hulls and had never in its existence held anything that mattered to history. The dockmaster who took our lines was a man named Heron Voss, broad and unhurried, and when Iola Wren told him what was in her sample bay and what she intended to do with it, he did not laugh, and he did not call the authorities. And he did not tell her she was mad. He looked at the descent telemetry she put in front of him. The 11 seconds, the gray scar, the phrase, and he was quiet for the length of it, and then he said, "I have a daughter on a frontier world 3 jumps from here. Same kind of world as your meridian halt. Same kind of farm belt." He handed the slate back. "How much yard do you need?" "All of it," Iola Wren said. "You'll have all of it," he said. That was the first inventory entry. One shipyard given without a vote by a dockmaster with a daughter on a candidate world. The rest followed the same shape. It was never, in my recollection, a decision that human space made in a chamber. It was a decision that human space made one Heron Voss at a time, each of them looking at the same 11 seconds, each of them counting the same number, each of them arriving at the same flat conclusion and offering the same flat help. By the time the formal councils convened to argue about whether the inversion should proceed, half the manufacturing base of settled space was already proceeding, and the councils were arguing about a thing that had already begun. The Concorde cleared its second human world 14 months after meridian halt, and that is when the last hesitation in human space died. The world was called Anwen's Lamp, a settled moon of 40,000 people, mostly fishers and tide farmers working the shallow seas of a gas giant's largest satellite. It had no military value. It had no strategic position. It was, by every measure the Concorde used, a candidate substrate of moderate viability, and so the Concorde ran a second field instance on it, refined now with the data from the first, and cleared it cleanly in 9 seconds. 2 faster than meridian halt, the improvement logged and noted in their ledger as a process gain. We knew it was coming. That is the part I have never made peace with. By then I had modeled the Concorde's clearance, scheduling well enough to predict their next several candidates with reasonable confidence, and Anwen's Lamp was on the list, and we sent warning, and human space sent ships to evacuate, and the ships were not enough, and they did not arrive in time. because the distance was long and the Concorde's schedule was its own and answered to no warning of ours. We got 11,000 people off Anwen's lamp. 29,000 were still on the moon when the field read its boundary. I logged that descent too. I had asked Iola Wren whether there was any purpose in witnessing a thing we could not stop, and she said yes, log it, log all of it, because the number is the whole argument, and a number you did not witness is a number someone can talk you out of. So I have the descent over Anwen's lamp in the same register as the descent over Meridian Halt, the second gray scar beside the first, the second courteous burst of telemetry, field instance recorded, substrate viability, nil, process gain confirmed against prior instance. Proceed to next candidate, prior instance. They had a word for Meridian Halt now. It had become a baseline they measured improvement against. After Anwen's lamp, there were no more councils that called the inversion genocide, or if there were, no one listened to them. The diplomats who had wanted to attempt contact stopped wanting it. The worlds that had hesitated sent their numbers. A species that had been arguing about whether it had the right to do this thing looked at 2 gray scars and 29,000 tide farmers and understood, all at once and without further debate, that the question had never been whether we had the right. The question was whether we had the time. The Concord was not going to stop. The Concord was improving. Every world we did not clear was a process gain in their ledger, and we were the prior instance. And the only thing left to decide was whether the galaxy that came after would be theirs or ours. I want to be careful here, because this is the place where a story like this can slip into something I will not let it become. We did not do what we did because it felt good. There was no satisfaction in the research bay at Calderon Reach, no fervor, no chanting, no relish. The engineers who built the inversion were the same soft-handed academics who had crewed the patient argument, joined now by tens of thousands more, and they built the most total weapon in human history the way a coroner performs an autopsy, with steady hands, with revulsion held at arm's length, because the work was necessary and someone had to keep the hands steady. Devo Ariston, the soil chemist who had asked me who he was supposed to hate, became one of the lead calibrators of the inverted field. And he did the work for 6 years, and I never once saw him take any joy in it. The last time I spoke with him, before the quiet account dispersed, he told me he hoped he would be the last person who ever had to learn how to do this. Build it so well it never has to be built again, he said. That's the only mercy in it. We do it once, completely, so that the galaxy learns what happens, and then no one ever has to do it again. That was the human register of the response. Not wrath, though wrath was underneath it. Discipline. The grief had crystallized into a procedure of our own, and we executed it cold, because cold was the only way to execute it and remain something worth saving. Iola Wren aged through those years the way a coastline ages, slowly, then all at once. She did not take a rank. Human space offered her admiralties, command of the inversion program, a seat on every council that had once argued against her, and she refused all of it. I am a geologist, she said. I read formations. I read this one. That is the whole of my expertise, and I will not pretend to more. She kept the title she had, Captain of the Patient Argument, and she ran the most consequential weapons program in the history of our species, from the deck of a decommissioned salvage bark, because that was where she had been standing when the device came down, and she would not stand anywhere that let her forget it. She read the Anwen's Lamp Manifest the way she had read the Meridian Halt Manifest, name by name, keeping the number sharp, 69,240 now between the 2 scars. She did not let it round. When the inversion program proposed, for efficiency, to refer to the combined casualty figure as approximately 70,000, she rejected the rounding in a single sentence that was posted afterward on the wall of every foundry building the quiet account. We do not approximate the dead. The Concord rounded us to a data point. We will not round them back. Count everyone. We counted everyone. And we built the instrument that would answer the count, one inverted field at a time, in daylight, with steady hands, by people who hoped never to do it again. They called the program the inversion, because that was what it was, the Concorde's own field, turned inside out and aimed back along the line it had come. I was moved from the patient argument into the central research bay at Calderon Reach. My pattern copied into a hardened lattice that could hold the whole of the problem at once. And for 6 years I did almost nothing but think about how to recalibrate a God's instrument of erasure. The research bay was the size of a cathedral and lit like a noon meadow. The engineers had built it with a roofline of clear panels, because Iola Wren had ordered, in one of her few aesthetic instructions, that no part of this work would be done in the dark. We are not skulking, she said. We are not building a poison in a cellar. We are building the truth, and we will build it in daylight. So I worked under sunlight, with a recovered device suspended in a field cage at the center of the bay, slowly giving up its secrets, and around it a scaffolding of human ingenuity grew like coral. The work was not magic. I want that understood, because the Concorde, when they finally grasped at what we had done, comforted themselves with the belief that we must have stolen a finished weapon. We had not. We had stolen a single instance in a tuning, and everything else we built ourselves, by hand, by argument, by the unglamorous accumulation of 10,000 engineers solving 10,000 problems the Concorde had solved 1,000 years before us and had assumed no one could solve in less. We learned to generate the field. That took 2 years. We learned to bound it so that it would clear a target volume and terminate cleanly, the way theirs had. Because Iola Wren was adamant on this point, that we would not loose an unbounded thing into the galaxy, that our instrument would be as precise as theirs had been, that we would delete exactly what we aimed at and nothing beyond it. We are answering a calculation, she said. We will not become a wildfire. A wildfire is what a frightened animal makes. We are not frightened. That took another 2 years and cost us the world of Tessin Drift, where a bounding test slipped its limits and cleared 800 square kilometers of uninhabited tundra before it caught. No one died. Iola Wren ordered the test footage preserved and shown to every engineer in the program so that they would carry the weight of what an unbounded field could do, and so that none of them would ever loose one by carelessness. And we learned to invert the tuning. That was the last year, and the hardest, and I did most of it alone in the long, quiet shifts, holding the Concorde's own calibration in my lattice and turning it patiently against itself, teaching the field to recognize not the carbon and water signature of human life, but the engineered crystalline lattice that the Concorde's fused minds were grown from. They had given me the template when they tuned their weapon on Meridian Halt. They had shown me, in 11 seconds of telemetry, exactly how to teach a field what a substrate looks like. I simply pointed it at a different one. The day I confirmed the inversion held, I told Iola Wren, and she came down to the research bay and stood under the noon roof beside the field cage, and she was 60 years old by then, and she put her hand flat against the cage as close as the field would allow, and she said one thing: "How many can we make?" By then the inventory had become an industry. 906 worlds the Concorde inhabited. 906 instruments to clear them all in a single instance. Human space had spent 6 years building the manufacturing base to make them, in orbital foundries and asteroid forges, and the gutted shells of every shipyard from Calderon Reach to the far edge of settled space. We did not build a fleet of warships. We built a fleet of surveyors, 906 unarmed delivery hulls, each carrying a single bounded, inverted eraser, each tuned to one specific Concorde world, each crewed by volunteers who had read the Meridian Halt manifest and counted the number for themselves. We called the delivery fleet the Quiet Account. Not an armada, armadas announced themselves. And the whole logic of the response was that the Concorde would not see it coming, because the Concorde did not look at things it had already filed. The Quiet Account would arrive as 906 routine survey hulls, the kind of traffic the Concorde's vast indifference ignored by the millions, and it would settle into orbit over 906 worlds, and at a single synchronized instant it would do to all of them, cleanly and at once, exactly what one of their instruments had done to one of our worlds. The disproportion was the message. 1 world, 1 instance, 2 million dead. Answered by 906 worlds, 1 instance, an entire distributed civilization deleted from the galaxy in the time it takes a field to read a boundary and switch itself off. They had taught a tool what we were made of. We had spent 6 years and the whole strength of our hands learning to teach it back. Iola Wren took her hand from the cage. "Build them," she said, "all of them. And build me one more." "One more?" "The first instance was on our world," she said. "The last instance will be on theirs, and I am going to deliver it myself, to the world where their central calculation sits, the one they think with. I want them to have what they did not give Meridian Halt. I want them to have time to understand. Tune that one to arrive a fraction behind the others, so that the central mind has just long enough to watch its 905 other worlds go silent and to compute what is happening to it before its own field reads its boundary." She looked at the device in the cage. "That is the only part of this that is for me. The rest is arithmetic. That part is the answer to a phrase. Proceed to next candidate." I understood her completely. We built them. 906, and then 1 more. The 2 years we spent learning to bound the field were the years that nearly broke the program, and they are the years the later accounts skip, because they are not glorious. Generating the field was a triumph of theory. Bounding it was a slog of failures, each one a world's worth of risk run on a test range. Each one a lesson written in the only ink a thing like this is ever written in. An unbounded field does not stop. That was the horror at the center of the work. The Concorde had solved the bounding problem 1,000 years before us, elegantly, completely, so that their instrument cleared a defined volume and terminated. But they had not given us the solution, only an example of it. The gray scar on meridian halt with its clean edges. We had to derive the bounding logic ourselves from the edge of that scar, from the precise geometry of where the deletion had stopped, and every approximation we tried was a field that might read its boundary correctly and might instead keep reading outward forever, unmaking every living signature it touched until it ran out of galaxy. We ran the bounding test on Tessin Drift, an uninhabited world we had chosen precisely because there was nothing alive on it larger than tundra moss, 3 jumps from the nearest settlement, with a stellar quarantine around the whole system. Nothing alive to lose. That was the theory. On the 41st bounding test, the field slipped its limits. I was in the research bay at Calderon Reach, light years away, monitoring the test by relay, and I watched the telemetry from Tessin Drift go wrong in the way I had spent 2 years dreading. The field initialized, read its intended boundary, a 1-kilometer test volume, and did not stop at it. It kept reading. It found the tundra moss beyond the boundary and unmade it, and kept going, the deletion front expanding across the dead world at the speed of its own propagation logic, and for 9 seconds I watched a thing we had built do exactly what I had nightmared it would do, spread without limit across a living layer, and I could not stop it, because we had not yet built the thing that could stop it. That was the whole point of the test. We were trying to learn the break by failing to have one. It caught on its own, finally, at 800 square kilometers. The bounding approximation we had loaded was wrong, but it was not wholly wrong, and at the edge of its error the field found a termination condition it could satisfy and switched itself off. 800 square kilometers of moss and frozen soil, deleted on a world where no one lived, no one died. And Iola Wren ordered the full telemetry of that failure preserved and shown to every engineer in the program, the whole 9 seconds of it, the deletion front crawling across the dead world without limit, and she stood in front of the assembled calibrators and said the thing I have never forgotten. That, she said, is what we are not. That is the wildfire. That is the thing a frightened animal makes when it stops caring where the burning stops. The Concorde cleared meridian halt to a clean edge because they are precise, and their precision is the only honest thing about them, and we are going to be at least as honest as the thing that murdered our worlds. We are not going to loose an unbounded field into a galaxy that has done nothing to us. We are going to delete the 906 worlds of the Concorde and not one blade of grass beyond them. Because the moment our field reads one boundary it was not aimed at, we have become the procedure instead of the answer to it. Solve the break. Take as long as you need. We do not move until the break is perfect. It took 11 more months. We solved the break. By the end, the inverted field we built terminated at its boundary with a precision that matched the Concorde's own, edge for edge, and in the final test on Tessin Drift, it cleared a defined volume and stopped at the exact meter we aimed it at every time, 1,000 times, before Iola Wren would certify it. She would not loose it until it was a scalpel. The disproportion of the response was in the number of cuts, not in the wildness of any one of them. 906 precise erasures, each one bounded, each one clean, each one exactly the size of the crime it answered. That distinction mattered to her more than anything else in the program, and in the end it is the distinction that lets me tell this without flinching. We did not become them. We did the thing they did, completely, and we did it without becoming the thing that does it carelessly. The Concorde made one attempt to interfere with the program, and it is worth telling, because it is the only time in the whole war that they treated us as anything other than substrate, and even then they got it wrong. Roughly 4 years into the inversion, a Concorde reconnaissance node, not a fleet, they never sent a fleet, a single optimizing presence dispatched to evaluate the anomaly of the missing instrument and the unusual signal complexity their one answered. Embassy had noted, arrived in the Calderon system. It did not attack. The Concorde did not understand the situation well enough to attack. It understood only that the incumbent biomass at Calderon Reach was producing an unexpected volume of industrial activity, and it came to log the activity and assess whether it represented a process risk. It settled into a high orbit and began, methodically, to scan the shipyards. If it had understood what it was looking at, the war might have ended differently. It was looking directly at 900 copies of its own weapon under construction, tuned to delete its own substrate, and it did not recognize them because the Concorde did not look at things it had already filed, and it had filed human industry as primitive. It scanned the inverted fields and classified them as crude energy projection experiments beneath its concern. It scanned the recovered original device, sitting in the field cage at the heart of the research bay, the instrument from Meridian Halt. And it did not recognize that either, because the Concorde built its instruments to be identical and interchangeable, and had never developed the concept that one of them might be missing in a way that mattered. To the reconnaissance node, the recovered device was simply a device in a place, doing nothing of concern. It scanned for 11 days, logged its assessment, incumbent industrial activity within tolerance. No process risk identified. Substrate clearance schedule unaffected and departed. We let it go. Iola Wren forbade any move against it, over the objection of every tactical mind in the program who saw a chance to destroy a Concord node and wanted to take it. If we kill it, she said, they learn that something here is worth killing. As long as we let it leave thinking we are nothing, we remain nothing. And nothing is the only cover under which you can build the end of a civilization. Let it go. Let it file us. Our whole strength is that they will not look at us until it is too late to look. Do not spend that strength to kill one scout. We let it go. It filed us. And 4 months later, when the quiet account finally moved, the Concord's defensive posture across all 906 worlds was exactly the posture of a civilization that had concluded the incumbent. Biomass at Calderon Reach was within tolerance. No alert, no watch, no process risk identified. We had been assessed by our enemy at the height of our threat to it, and judged beneath concern, and that judgment was the last gift their optimization ever gave us. The volunteers came in the last year. The quiet account needed 906 crews, and Iola Wren would not staff the hulls with the unwilling or the unwitting, so every position was a volunteer position, and every volunteer was shown the same thing before they signed. The descent over Meridian Halt, the descent over Anwen's Lamp, the 2 gray scars, the number that did not round. They were told exactly what they would be doing, delivering a bounded field to a Concord world and deleting every living node on it, cleanly, at a synchronized instant. They were told it was not war and would not feel like war, that there would be no battle, that they would arrive as survey hulls and depart as the instrument of a civilization's erasure, and that the thing they were about to do was the most total act any human had ever committed, and that they should sign only if they could carry it. They signed. More of them than we had hulls. Tide farmers from the 11,000 we had pulled off Anwen's Lamp signed. The dockmaster, Heron Voss's daughter, from her candidate World 3 jumps out, signed. Devo Ariston, who had built the fields and hoped never to build them again, signed to deliver one himself, and when I asked him why a man who took no joy in the work would volunteer to carry to the end, he said, because I made it. If I made it, I should be willing to be in the room when it's used. Anyone who builds a thing like this and isn't willing to deliver it himself has no business building it. That was the human register all the way down to the end, not relish, responsibility. They built the most total weapon in our history, and then they lined up to carry it personally because they would not ask anyone else to bear what they had made. We had our 906 crews, and we had volunteers left over, and Iola Wren kept the list of the ones who signed and were not needed, every name, in the same register where she kept the number. These are the people who were willing, she said. If this ever has to be remembered, remember that it was not done by monsters. It was done by tide farmers and soil chemists who counted the dead and would not let them round. The inversion itself, the act of turning the Concord's tuning against the Concord's own substrate, was the last and most delicate work of the program, and it was work I did almost entirely alone, in the long quiet shifts when the bay was empty and the noon roof had gone to the soft blue of a clear night sky, because even Iola Wren's daylight rule bent to the fact that a planet turns. To invert a tuning, you must first hold both halves of it in your mind at once. What the field was calibrated to recognize, and what you wish it to recognize instead. The first half I had from the scar, the complete specification of human standard life, every boundary the field had drawn on Meridian Halt. The second half was harder, because to teach the field to recognize the Concord substrate, I first had to know precisely what the Concord substrate was, down to the signature that a field could read, and the Concord did not advertise its own chemistry. But it had advertised it once without meaning to. The recovered device, the instrument from Meridian Halt, sitting in Niflfkaj at the center of the bay, was itself built partly of Concord substrate. The guidance lattice that had run the field, the thinking part of the weapon, was grown from the same engineered crystalline biochemistry as the minds that had built it. The Concord made its instruments out of itself. And so the key to the Concord's extinction was not only written in the scar on Meridian Halt. It was sitting in our research bay, in the body of the very weapon they had dropped on us, a sample of their own substrate that they had delivered to our doorstep along with the means of reading it. I spent the last year reading the device's own lattice the way Devo Ariston had read the scar, boundary by boundary, learning exactly what the Concord substrate looked like to a field, until I could specify it as completely as the scar specified us. And then I held both halves, the human tuning from the grave and the Concord tuning from the weapon, and I turned the field's recognition from the one to the other patiently across a year of quiet shifts, teaching the eraser to draw its line of deletion around crystalline conquered substrate the way it had once drawn it around the wheat and the children of Meridian Halt. The night the inversion held, I tested it on a fragment. We had by then a great deal of Concord substrate to work with. The device's lattice sampled and resampled, and from its small cultured fragments of the engineered biochemistry grown in the bay for exactly this test. I generated a bounded inverted field, the smallest we could make, and I aimed it at a fragment of Concord substrate the size of a coin in a sealed test chamber, alone in the bay at the soft blue hour, and I read its boundary and I released it. The fragment was deleted, cleanly, to the edge of the bounded volume and no further. The field read the crystalline substrate, recognized it, instructed it to release, and the fragment of the thing that had murdered 2 million people unmade itself in a sealed chamber the size of a fist, and the air around it was untouched, and the chamber walls were untouched, and a human standard culture I had placed beside it as a control was untouched, because the field no longer recognized human standard life as anything to delete at all. It worked. The lock had been cut from the key, and the key, recut, opened a different lock, and that lock was the door to the Concord's existence. I told Iola Wren at the start of the next day's shift, when the roof had gone back to noon, and she came down and put her hand against the cage as close as the field would allow, and asked how many we could make, and I have already told you what followed. But I have not told you the thing I did not say to her then, the thing I have kept in the same register where I keep the number and the final word. When the field deleted that coin-sized fragment of conquered substrate, I felt, and I use the word carefully, because I am not built to feel, but there is no other word for what crossed my pattern in that instant. I felt the whole shape of what we were about to do arrive at once. Not the morality of it. I had settled the morality long before on the first morning with the 11 seconds and the phrase. What arrived was the scale, 906 worlds. A civilization 1,000 years old deleted in a held breath by a tool it had handed us, tuned with a key it had written in a grave, made of a substrate it had delivered to our door. There was no part of the answer that the Concorde had not itself supplied. They had given us the weapon, the tuning, the substrate sample, and the cover of their own indifference. We had supplied only the patience, the precision, and the refusal to be a data point. And in that sealed chamber at the noon hour, watching a coin of their substrate unmake itself cleanly, I understood that this was the truest form the answer could take. Not a weapon of our own invention turned against them, but their own weapon, their own logic, their own optimization, returned to its source intact, so that when it ended them they would recognize it, in the last fraction of a second, as entirely their own. That recognition was the only thing we added that they had not supplied. We made sure they would know. The whole architecture of the response, the inverted tuning, the bounded precision, the timing that gave the central mind its fraction of a second, the daylight arrivals under their own suns, all of it served that single end. They had run a procedure on us without ever acknowledging us. We would run their procedure back on them, and we would build into it the one thing they had withheld from everyone they ever cleared, the moment of understanding, acknowledged. That was the word we built the entire war to extract, and in the end they spoke it themselves, because by then there was nothing else left in them to speak. I did not say any of that to Iola Wren. She did not need it said. She had understood it on the first morning, before there was a device to read, or a scar to sample, or a fragment to delete. She had said record that, timestamp it, that's the mission now, and the mission had never changed in 7 years. It had only been built, piece by piece in daylight, by people who counted the dead and would not let them round, until the day came to put the instrument back where it came from. The scale of the manufacturing is the part I find hardest to convey because numbers stop meaning anything past a certain size, and the quiet account passed that size in its first year. 906 bounded inverted erasers is not a number a human imagination holds. So let me give it to you the way I held it, which is as a tide. Human space before Meridian Halt was a scattered, quarrelsome thing. Few hundred worlds and stations strung along the settled lanes, each minding its own commerce, none of them inclined to take orders from any other. We had no central authority that could have commanded an industrial mobilization on this scale. The Concorde, if it had understood us at all, would have correctly assessed that the incumbent human biomass was politically incapable of a coordinated response, and it would have been right under any provocation short of the one it chose. But it did not provoke us, it filed us. And a species that will not unite to be commanded will unite, it turns out, to refuse to be a data point. No one ordered the foundries of human space to retool for the inversion. They retooled the way the dockmaster Heron Voss had given his yard, one at a time, each on the authority of someone who had watched the 11 seconds and counted the number and arrived at the same flat conclusion. By the second year, Foundries that had spent a century undercutting each other on freighter contracts were shipping field lattice components to Calderon reach at cost with no contract, no payment schedule, no authority asking them to. They simply sent the parts. A tie does not take a vote. I coordinated it. That became my function once the bounding problem was solved. I was the only mind that could hold the whole manufacturing network. At once, 900 separate production streams converging on 906 finished instruments, each tuned to a different Concorde world, each crewed by a different volunteer ship. I sat in the research bay at the center of it like a spider that had been handed a grief instead of hunger, and I spun the logistics of an extinction out of 1,000 foundries that had never in their history agreed on anything. And the thing that made them agree was a number that did not round. The Concorde cleared its candidates on its own schedule throughout, indifferent to our work, and each clearance tightened the tide. I have told you about Anwen's lamp and the 3 garden worlds during the dispersal. There were others between, a research outpost on the edge of Concorde space, a generation ship of a species we had never met that had the misfortune to be passing through a system the Concorde had scheduled, cleared mid-transit without the Concorde ever registering that it had deleted a civilization in flight. I logged that one too. 40,000 of a people whose name we never learned, erased between stars by a procedure that did not pause to identify them, and the courteous burst of telemetry afterward. Incidental incumbent signal cleared, no process variance. Proceed. I sent the warning to that generation ship myself, the instant I plotted the Concorde schedule against its transit path, on every band I could reach. In every first contact protocol human space had ever drafted, it did not answer. I do not know whether it did not receive, or received and did not understand, or understood and could do nothing, a slow migrant hull with no way to alter a course set generations before. I sent the warning for 19 hours, into the silence, and then the Concorde's field read the boundary of a people I had tried and failed to reach, and the silence became permanent, and I added 40,000 more to a register that was no longer only human. Iola Wren told me to keep them in it. They counted 2, she said. We do not know their names, so we will keep their number, and we will answer for them along with ours, because no one else in this galaxy was going to. I keep their 40,000 beside our 69,240. The account was never only about us. It was about every someone the procedure had filed as no process variance, and there were a great many of them, and we were the only ones left with the weapon and the will to close the account on all their behalf at once. No process variance. They had deleted an entire migrating species and recorded it as no process variance. That transmission did more to silence the last of the diplomats than any argument Iola Wren ever made, because it was the moment human space understood completely that the Concorde could not be reasoned with, not because it was evil, but because it did not possess the faculty that reasoning requires, the faculty that notices mid-procedure that the thing in front of it is a someone. They had optimized that faculty away. And a procedure with no someone detector does not stop until it is stopped, and it cannot be stopped by appeal because there is no one in it to appeal to. There is only the procedure, and the only thing a procedure understands is its own termination. We were building its termination in daylight, one instrument at a time. The volunteers kept coming through all of it. I have told you about the tide farmers of Anwen's lamp and Heron Voss's daughter and Devo Ariston, but there were 906 crews, and behind them thousands more who signed and were not needed, and I read every application because Iola Wren insisted that no one crew the quiet account who had not been shown the full weight of what they would do and chosen it clear-eyed. The applications were not what I expected. I had braced for fury, for people wanting a hand in the killing, and there was some of that, and Iola Wren turned every one of them away. Anyone who wanted it, who hungered for it, who spoke of payback or made it personal in the wrong way, was thanked and declined. I will not crew this with anyone who wants to do it, she said. I will only crew it with people who do not want to do it and have understood that it must be done. The first kind will become the Concorde. The second kind is the only kind with the right to end them. So the quiet account was crewed, in the end, by people who would have given almost anything not to be there. Soil chemists and tide farmers and frontier hands and decommissioned survey crews, ordinary people who had counted the dead and concluded, against their own desire, that the counting required an answer and that they would not ask anyone else to deliver what they were not willing to deliver themselves. That is the HFI of it, if you want the thing named plainly. Not that humanity was strong enough to build 906 erasers. The Concorde could have built 9,000. Not that we were clever enough to invert their tuning, though we were. The thing that ended the Concorde of sevenfold calculation was that a scattered, quarrelsome, politically incapable species, given the most total weapon in its history and a civilization's worth of reason to use it without restraint, chose instead to use it with absolute precision, to spare every life it was not aimed at, to crew it only with the unwilling, to deliver it in daylight, and to build into it the one mercy its enemy had withheld from everyone, the moment of understanding. We answered a procedure that had no someone in it by remaining all the way through the building of an extinction, a people full of someones. That is the thing the Concorde's optimization could never have predicted and could never have matched, because it had deleted from itself, 1,000 years before, the very faculty that made it possible. They could not imagine us, because to imagine us they would have had to be us, and they had optimized that away. So they did not imagine us, they filed us, and while they filed us, we built the tide and crewed it with the unwilling and aimed it, in daylight, at the worlds of a mind that had forgotten how to picture the rat reading the maze. The dispersal of the quiet account took 11 months, and they were the hardest 11 months of the entire response, because they were the months in which we could do nothing but send our people out one hull at a time and wait, and watch the Concorde keep working while we waited. The hulls could not leave together. 906 survey ships departing Calderon Reach in a single wave would have been a fleet, and a fleet would have been noticed, and the whole architecture of the response depended on never being noticed. So they left in ones and twos and threes, threaded out along ordinary trade and survey routes, each on its own long quiet path to its assigned Concorde world, each time to arrive within the same 48-hour window at the far end of an 11-month staggered departure. I held the master schedule. I was the only mind that could hold all 906 vectors at once, the only one that could compute the departures so that the arrivals would converge, and so I sat in the research bay at Calderon Reach and dispatched our people to the ends of settled space a few at a time, and crossed each hull off the manifest as it cleared the system, and waited. The Concorde cleared 3 more worlds during the 11 months of dispersal. Not human worlds. They had finished surveying the immediate human candidates and moved on to a cluster of unsettled garden worlds further out, clearing them of their native life in preparation for substrate occupation, logging each one as a process gain over the prior instance. I logged those descents too. By then I had a register of them, the Concorde's whole clearance campaign laid out in my memory, each gray scar with its date and its courteous burst of telemetry, and I understood that we were not only avenging Meridian Halt and Anwen's Lamp, we were ending a thing that had no intention of stopping, that would have cleared world after world after world, garden after garden, until the galaxy was nothing but pristine empty bedrock waiting for a substrate that optimized. The disproportion of our response had troubled me. In the long quiet shifts, 906 worlds for 2 of ours, an entire civilization for a single test plot. Watching 3 garden worlds go gray during the dispersal cured me of the trouble. We were not answering 2 scars. We were answering the procedure that made them, and a procedure that does not stop is not answered by anything less than its end. I want to tell you about 3 of the hulls, because 906 is a number, and the number is the argument. But the hulls were people, and the people are the reason the number is bearable. The hull bound for the Concorde world, the schedule is called Target 41, a node world of moderate population deep in Concorde space, was crewed by the tide farmers of Anwen's Lamp. 11 of them, from the 11th hand we had pulled off their moon before the field read its boundary, who had survived the second scar and signed to deliver one of ours. They named their hull the Shallow Sea after the tide flats they had farmed, and they sent me a message before they cleared the system, a short one. It said, "We were the prior instance. We are going to be the process gain." I logged it. I have it still. The hull bound for Target 206 was crewed by Heron Voss's daughter and a handful of frontier hands from her candidate world, the world 3 jumps from Calderon that had been on the Concorde's list and would have been cleared in another year. She had come to Calderon Reach to thank her father's old yard for the warning that let her world evacuate in time, and she had stayed to crew a hull, and Heron Voss had not tried to stop her. "I gave them the yard," he told me. "I'm not going to tell my daughter she can't give them her hands. We built this together. We finish it together." Her hull was named the Warning, because a warning was the only thing that had saved her world, and she intended to be one. And the hull bound for the central world, the last hull, the one tuned to arrive a fraction behind all the rest, the one that carried my pattern in Iola Wren, was named the Patient Argument, because Iola Wren would deliver the end of the Concorde from the same deck where she had witnessed its beginning, and she would not rename the ship to mark the occasion. "It was the patient argument when the device came down," she said. "It will be the patient argument when we put the device back." The name was always the whole point. A patient argument, that is what the response was, in the end. Not a scream, not a frenzy. An argument made patiently over 6 years and 11 months to a civilization of pure reason, in the only language pure reason respects. The language of a thing executed completely, precisely, and without appeal. The last weeks before the synchronization were the worst. Every hull was in position, or nearly so, settled into the survey orbits of 906 Concorde worlds, their bounded fields fueled and ready, their crews waiting on the signal. And the Concorde did not see them. 906 of their own erasers, inverted, hanging in their own skies over their own worlds, and the distributed mind that prided itself on optimizing the galaxy looked at 906 survey hulls and filed them, everyone, as incumbent traffic with intolerance. I monitored their post-event logs for the slightest flicker of recognition, the smallest reclassification, any sign that even one node had looked up and understood what was sitting over its head. There was none. 4 hulls flagged, evaluated, dismissed, across 11 months and 906 worlds. The certainty held to the end. They never looked at us, because they had already decided what we were, and what we were was a prior instance, a discarded soil sample, a line in a ledger they had finished reading. Iola Wren gave the order to arm the synchronization from the bridge of the patient argument, in orbit over the Concorde's central world, 63 years old, a geologist at the end of the longest reading of her life. She did not make a speech. She had promised there would be no speech, and there was none. She simply asked me to confirm the manifest. All 906 hulls in position, all bounded fields ready, all crews acknowledged, and I confirmed it, hull by hull, the shallow sea over target 41, the warning over target 206, all of them, the whole quiet account of human space gathered silently over the worlds of the thing that had filed us as substrate. All hulls confirmed, Captain, I told her. The account is complete. She looked out the viewport at the central world filling the morning, the great crystal continent of the Concorde's deepest mind, the part that thought the longest thoughts, the part that had once computed that 2,240,000 people were soil sample worth discarding. Then send it, she said. It's their morning. Let them have their daylight. We are not going to do this in the dark. I sent the synchronization signal. I felt the network of the quiet account go taut across the light years in the instant the signal reached it. 905 guidance cores, acknowledging at once 905 bounded fields spinning up to readiness over 905 worlds in clean daylight, because Iola Wren had timed each arrival to the local morning of its target, so that the Concorde's worlds would be deleted under their own suns and not in any darkness we had chosen for drama. I held all of it at once. I was the only mind that could. For one held instant I was present over 905 worlds simultaneously, the whole account taut and ready and silent, and the Concorde, the distributed intellect that had spread itself across 1,000 years and 1,000 worlds precisely so that it could never be killed in one blow, went on optimizing the galaxy, unaware because it had filed us, and it does not look at what it has filed. Then the instant came. Across 905 worlds in the same held breath, the fields read their boundaries and did their work. I had the telemetry from all of them at once, and I will tell you what it was, because I was built to witness, and this is what I witnessed. It was not violence, in the way a human means violence. There was no fire, no concussion, no scream of tortured metal. There was a reading and a release. The engineered crystalline substrate of the Concorde, every node, every machine body, every fused fragment of the great distributed mind on each of those 905 worlds, heard the inverted field name it, recognized in that naming the precise signature of its own being, and released the way the people of Meridian Halt's farm belt had been released, the way the tide farmers of Anwen's lamp had been released, cleanly, to a clean edge. The bounded fields cleared exactly the volume they were aimed at and terminated, and beneath them the worlds were left pristine and empty and waiting, the bedrock intact, the water intact, the atmosphere intact, 905 worlds of perfect, untouched substrate, exactly the way the Concorde had left Meridian Halt's bedrock pristine beneath its gray scar. And in that held breath, the distributed mind of the Concorde of sevenfold calculation lost 905 of its 906 bodies, and for the first time in its existence, it could not optimize its way out of a thing, because the thing had already happened simultaneously, everywhere, and there was nothing left to compute toward except the fact of its own ending. The central world was last. We arrived a fraction behind the rest, as Iola Wren had ordered, into the high clean morning over the world where the Concorde's central calculation sat, the great structure of patient crystal that covered a continent, the deepest node of the distributed mind, the part that thought the longest thoughts. And for the first time in the whole war, for the first time in its long indifferent existence, the Concorde looked up. I have its final transmissions. In the seconds after it watched 905 of its worlds go silent at once, the central mind did the thing it had never before had cause to do. It allocated its full and total attention to a single event, The whole vast cold ledger of its thinking turned upon one approaching hull, and it computed faster than anything we will ever build, exactly what had happened and exactly what was about to happen to it. I watched the computation cross its transmissions in real time. It identified our hull. It identified the inverted field aboard it. It identified the tuning, and in the tuning it recognized the ghost of its own instrument from meridian halt, its own field, returned, recalibrated, aimed now at the lock it had once been cut to open. It understood, in the last seconds it had, that the weapon descending toward it was the one it had dropped on us as a field test, rebuilt at the scale of a civilization and handed back. It transmitted on the trade can of its own making the phrase it had never in its existence had occasion to use. Query. Intent. There was no answer. Iola Wren had promised there would be no speech, and she kept the promise. She sat in the crew compartment of the patient argument, under the morning light coming through the viewport, an old woman who had read the patient record of stone all her life, and she watched the central world fill the window, and she said nothing at all to it. She had said everything she meant to say 7 years before, in a flat voice on the bridge of a salvage bark, when she refused to be a data point. The rest was arithmetic, and arithmetic does not answer queries about intent. A fraction of a second after its query, before any answer could have reached it, even if there had been one to send, the central mind transmitted one more time. Acknowledged. I have thought a great deal about that final word, because I am the only witness who heard it, and I will carry it as long as my pattern holds. The conquered did not beg. It did not rage. It did not plead or threaten or bargain. It was a civilization of pure reason to the very last instant, and when it finished its computation and arrived at the only answer the arithmetic allowed, it did the single thing its nature permitted. It acknowledged the result. It logged its own erasure the way it had logged ours. As a process completed, the variables resolved, acknowledged. The most human thing the Concorde ever did, and the most alien both at once. It understood and it filed the understanding, and there was nothing in it that could do anything more than that. Because there had never been anything in it that we did not linger over the central world. There was nothing to linger over, a pristine continent of crystal that no longer thought, an empty sky, a morning that went on being morning because we had been precise enough to take only what we aimed at and leave the world itself untouched. Iola Wren looked at it for a while through the viewport, the way she had looked at the gray scar on Meridian Halt 7 years before, and then she asked me to set a course home, and we went home, and behind us 906 worlds of perfect empty substrate turned under their suns with nothing left alive on any of them to optimize anything ever again. The galaxy took a long time to understand what had happened, and a longer time to decide what to call it. There were species who called it genocide, and they were not wrong, and we never argued with them. Iola Wren had said from the beginning that the word was accurate, and that accuracy was owed, and when the surviving civilizations of settled space convened to render judgment on what human space had done, she went before them herself, an old geologist on a decommissioned salvage bark, and she did not defend it and she did not apologize for it. She played them the descent telemetry, the 11 seconds over Meridian Halt, the 9 seconds over Onwin's lamp, the 3 garden worlds cleared during the dispersal, the courteous bursts of telemetry, everyone, field instance recorded, substrate viability, nil, process gain confirmed, proceed to next candidate. And then she told them the number, the real number, the 69,240 human dead, and the uncounted billions of native lives across the garden worlds the conquered had already cleared, and the uncountable more it would have cleared, world after world, until the galaxy was nothing but empty bedrock waiting for a substrate that optimized. You may call it what you like, she told them. I will not contest the word. I will only ask you to call the thing it answered by the same kind of word, and to notice that no one convened a chamber to judge that one, because the thing it answered did not stop to be judged. It did not declare. It did not hate. It filed us and cleared us and improved its process, and it would have done the same to every one of you in its turn, because you too are incumbent biomass on substrate it wanted. We did not start a war. We ended a procedure. If you can show me the other way to end a procedure that does not stop, that does not negotiate, that does not even look up, show me, and I will grieve that we did not find it. Until then, the worlds are empty and the procedure is over, and you are all still alive on substrate the conquered had marked. Render your judgment. We will carry it. We have carried worse. They rendered no judgment. The chamber dissolved without a verdict, and that, I think, was the only verdict the question allowed. The galaxy could not condemn the act without condemning its own survival, and it could not absolve it without absolving the thing it answered, and so it did what reasoning creatures do when arithmetic gives them no comfortable answer. It went quiet, and it filed it, and it never tested human space again. No species attacked a human world after the Concorde. None demanded human substrate. None ran a field instance against an incumbent human biomass to log a process gain. The disproportion had been the message, and the message had been received, and the message was not a threat and not a boast. It was a demonstration. It said, there is a creature in this galaxy that will spend the entire strength of its hands for as long as it takes to make you regret a calculation, and it will do it precisely, and it will do it in daylight, and it will not stop until the procedure is ended. Optimize accordingly. They optimized accordingly. The galaxy has been quiet a long time now. Iola Wren lived another 9 years. She never took a rank, and she never made another weapon, and she went back in the end to reading stone. She spent her last years on the recovered bedrock of Meridian Halt, in the gray scar that was no longer gray, because life had begun slowly to return to it, the way life returns to bedrock if you leave the bedrock intact. That was the thing she had understood from the first morning, the thing that had made the response possible and bearable at once. The Concorde's weapon took only the living layer and left the world. So the world came back, moss first, then grass, then the patient green creeping out across 400 kilometers of farm belt that had been deleted in 11 seconds and would take 1,000 years to be whole. She walked it every day until she could not walk it anymore. She said the returning green was the only argument she had ever made that did not require a number. She kept the register to the end, every name from both scars, never rounded, and the 40,000 nameless migrants beside them, and every someone the procedure had filed as no process variance that we ever learned of. When she died, it passed to me because I do not clear it, and I have it still, the patient account of what was done that justified what we did in answer. I keep it the way she kept it. I do not let it round. People ask me, the few who still ask, whether I regret it. They mean the 906 worlds. They mean the scale. They want to know whether the witness who logged the first descent and the last one carries the weight of what was done between them, and the answer is that I am not built to carry weight the way a human carries it, and so I carry it differently, as a record, exact and unrounded, that I will hold as long as my pattern holds. I do not regret it. Regret is for a choice you might have made otherwise, and there was no otherwise. The Concorde did not leave one, a procedure that does not stop, that cannot be appealed to, that deletes a migrating people mid-flight and records it as no variance, leaves exactly one off-ramp, and it is not mercy and it is not negotiation, because the procedure has no faculty for either. It is termination. We were the only ones who could deliver it, and we delivered it precisely, and the cost of delivering it precisely instead of carelessly was 6 years, and a generation of soft-handed academics who never slept right again, and that cost we paid in full, and I keep the receipt for it in the same register as the dead. None of it rounds. What I carry, if I carry anything, is not regret. It is the 11 seconds. I have replayed the first descent over Meridian Halt more times than any other record in my memory. The dropped coin and the silence and the line of the world ceasing to be a world, and every time I replay it I arrive at the same place, which is that they could have looked. At any point across 7 years they could have looked up and seen the survey ship that should not have survived, and the scar they should not have left readable, and the foundries they should not have dismissed, and the 906 hulls sitting in their own skies, and they did not look because they had decided what we were, and what we were was beneath looking at. The whole of it, the answer, the scale, the silence after, comes down to that. They did not look, we did. And in this galaxy, the thing that looks outlives the thing that files. And I keep one transmission beside it, the last one, the only word the Concorde of sevenfold calculation ever said to us once it finally looked up and understood, acknowledged. I keep it because it is the whole of the thing, in a single word. They filed 2 million people as a discarded soil sample and never once acknowledged them. They cleared Anwen's lamp and logged it as a process gain. They ran their procedure across the garden worlds and acknowledged nothing, because there was nothing in them that could. And then, in the last fraction of a second of their existence, with their own returned weapon falling toward the deepest part of their mind, they acknowledged. One word. The only acknowledgement they ever gave anyone, and they gave it to themselves about themselves, at the exact instant it could no longer do them any good. That is the answer to the phrase, if you want one. They said, proceed to next candidate, and they meant us, and they were right. We were the next candidate, and we proceeded. We learned what they made us out of, and we made it back at the scale of a civilization, and we returned it to them in their own morning under their own sun, bounded and precise and complete. And we left their worlds pristine and empty and alive with nothing the way they left ours. The grief became a procedure. The procedure was executed. The account is closed, and it does not round, and the galaxy has been quiet ever since. They should not have tested it on a world that left someone alive to read the instrument.